when we ask on checks and splits, and they occur both in solid and engineered products, but their cause is very different. And to get into that is, let's start with just doing solid flooring. And here is going into as a dry kill operation here, where you're looking in the drying process. You got a fan here, air movement going in this direction. The warm air is, at a specific temperature and controlled relative humidity. So we've got our airflow moving through this across the material. What's going to happen now is when this air is moving across the material, you're going to find that the outside perimeter of the boards are going to want to dry and begin to shrink. When we look at the inner portions of the plank, it remain at higher moisture content. They have not yet been affected by the heat or the air movement across that flooring. So this section of region inside is not going to shrink at this time. So as the plank goes through the drying process, now you look at it, we haven't changed anything in temperature or anything else, other than the fact now that the plank, the outer perimeter that is restricted from moving, so it's already contracted. Now you look at the inner portions of the plank are being compressed, and now it's moving back, so we're actually getting the core of the material to equalize with the outside of the material. So when we look at checks, as like Nafma said in there, checks will be present even in clear material. So there is, when it's in kiln dry material, and they're always there. There is no way to eliminate all checks. The checks are an inevitable result of manufacturing process, and when you look at the checks, are not necessarily a defect. As I talked earlier about character grade material, they're not necessarily a defect that's going to create an issue. The most important part is, a lot of times when I'm interviewing like an installer, we'll have a claim on checks, and you go out there and the next thing is wow, in the installer, were the checks present at the time of installation? No, they weren't. And so you ask the homeowner, well, no, we didn't see those for at least about 6 months. So you got a latent defect that the manufacturer couldn't see at the time of manufacturing the product. You've got a latent defect that the installer couldn't see at the time of installation. You've got a latent defect that the homeowner didn't see until most likely the heat went on. Well, now it's an open check, and now that's what they're concerned about. So the check is not, it's going back to is the history and understanding the history of where that check has traveled and how we identify that in the inspection process. So that was a latent defect that was present, and it was unidentifiable by all three parties. So it could not be classified as a defect. So when we start, just a simple one here is identifying the type of saw cuts. And we have here on the left is a sawn face, or we have the engineered of a peeled, or it's a peeled face. Understanding the process of this, when we start asking ourselves, for example, like a roll of paper towels, if we take a paper towels and peel it off the roll, that's exactly what this knife blade is doing right here. And you'll also see that we've got like little tiny lathe checks on this is called the loose side, but it's on the underside of when that's being peeled off. It can't be helped because when that material is coming off, it's being forced upward, so it's creating that bend and that's where you're getting the lathe checks from. In this particular photo, the lathe checks have telescoped through the surface. This is some Bruce 3-ply going back to about the 80s, but it was up in a window area where then what happened was you had the dry heat coming in from the window, and these surface checks came, or the lathe checks came through, and this is microscopically, you can see them. When we look at it here is when it's classified as a substrate. Well, that would be any kind of core material, whether it be HDF, whether it be solid core, or whether it would be plywood core. And you'll see the lathe checks are right here, along here. And the ones that telescoped here, you can see this one came through the surface and this one came through the surface. And that's where you find there's just enough stress in that material through changes where it snapped it pretty consistent across the width of the entire floor. Now, is that a defect in the product? No. That's a characteristic of the environment that the product was in. This happens, and you'll see it if you really look close. You'll see it in tabletops, you'll see it in flooring, you'll see it when you look at a rippled effect on, like, I was just down at the Whitney Lofts, and they were talking about their flooring, and the first thing I picked up on was other products in the home, and their table was identical to the floor. So it's characteristic of the house, not characteristic of the flooring. So there you're showing that in that regard it was environmental that created they'd be a lot tighter because it's a thinner veneer. But you will, if you look for them, this here characteristic will happen on a rotary peel.